This is Matt. I'm here with Jordan Schursky. He does film histories. Been noticing you on YouTube, Instagram, and I just wanted to talk to you today about pretty much everything going on. I feel like there's about to be a really dramatic shift in the movie industry, not just like in movie theaters, but I mean, we're seeing a lot of it already. And maybe by the time this comes out, there'll be some like news event that we're not anticipating or something will happen. But I know that you have a great perspective about history of film and all the changes the industry's gone through. Theaters been shut down for a while now. We've seen articles about AMC, their potential like bankruptcy. We're in the middle of the streaming wars right now too. So I don't know. I just want to get your initial thoughts on all that.
First of all, thanks for meeting up. It's strange times, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big, movie nerd like many people out there. And always the historical components of movies has always fascinated me more about, things that have happened, more, 50, 60 years ago. And one of the things I started looking into when this started happening was I was curious about the Spanish flu pandemic and that's effect on the film industry. And I was actually thinking about making like a quick YouTube video about that. And I didn't really find that much to make like a long-term video. But I did find some information I thought was really interesting. And one thing I want to point out is before Hollywood was really established out in California, most filming and most movies were being produced in Edison, New Jersey, or Long Island. Vitagraph Studios and Atlas Guy Blash had a huge studio out in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And what happened was when the Spanish flu pandemic happened, it kind of solidified that Hollywood, California was going to be the place to be for movies. Because even though Hollywood, California was already starting to become established, not that many people were crossing the country. A lot of people were still staying on the East Coast. And the pandemic kind of was like, hey, here's a big metropolitan area. Let's go out to California and we can kind of, be less, be away from people. And I think that was one of the things I did find. The thing about the Spanish flu, people look at it as like, it happened. It was crazy. But it was also like, hey, modern medicine's here. That kind of thing won't ever happen again. And then, guess what? It did. But in terms of what's happening now in the movie theater industry, I think is really interesting. And like you said, we are in the streaming wars. I look back on basically two major moments through film history. And one is the introduction of television in the 1940s and 50s. And movie theaters panicked when television was starting to be introduced into people's homes. Because, why go to the movie theater when you can just watch it at home? Basically what we're experiencing now, right? And so movie theaters got really inventive. They created incentives to bring people to the movie theaters. I mean, this is where you had smell-o-vision, and you had the second, you had the second revival of 3D.
It's like they had to get more almost gimmicky. Like they had to find a new appeal.
That's the perfect word. They were, it was very gimmicky. Cinerama, all these crazy things. Like you can't see this on a small screen. You have to be in a theater, and I think that's still the case. I mean, I still think even though theaters are going to be impacted, I think no matter what, there's going to be event level films that are going to come out and people are going to flock to the theaters. Like Christopher Nolan has Tenet coming out. People are going to flock to the theaters to see that. When Avatar 2 comes out in like 2067 or whatever, people are going to see that in theaters. Mm-hmm. Avengers is the biggest film of the year because it was an event film. It was building up for 10 years. I also think people want to go to see a movie in the theaters right away because if I don't know what's happening in the movie, it's going to be spoiled by Saturday. Like, if the movie comes out Friday, I'm going to be spoiled by Saturday. Unless I just don't go on the internet. So I think that's going to still drive people to the theaters.
Disney's kind of in an interesting position right now, too, because they, me, I haven't seen like the last few Marvel movies. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they kind of put a bow on things with Endgame and its current state. Like, they were still coming out with like Black Widow, and anytime they release any movie with the Marvel or Star Wars like IP, the money's made back. Black Widow, there's no like fear that that's not going to make money. But part of me was wondering if we are on a shift in general with Disney right now. They don't have a bunch of like superhero things I know Eternals, like there are a few things. It's not Iron Man, it's not this. So they just dropped Disney Plus.
You said like what, Eternals is coming out, but it's not Iron Man. But remember, Iron Man wasn't Iron Man either.
That's true.
I think,
a good point.
Marvel has become a brand for Disney. So at this point, people are going to go see a Marvel movie because it's a Marvel movie. They don't care they don't care what the context is. But this is also my personal issues with Marvel movies. Marvel movies have become so formulaic. I'm not saying that in a bad way, right? There's nothing wrong with something being formulaic because you know what you're paying your money into. Like, especially if if you're a family of 6, right? You have 4 kids. I know that's saying a lot, but I mean, like, that's over $100 just to go see one movie. And if I'm going to drop $100 or more to see a movie, I want to know what I'm getting. I want to make sure that I'm entertained and I get a story that I can walk away with and be happy with. Like, if I go pay that kind of money to go see The Lighthouse, I'm going to walk out and be like, all right, I got to stop and think about this movie and might get upset, but that's not to say, I think, there are families who do want to get challenged and go see movies that do that. I'm just saying.
It's a big market that they're kind of like riding on that market now with the kids and like the families. You and I, like, we're in the similar age group, grew up, and it was just kind of like this family thing to like go to the movies, things like that. After the Mandalorian craze, it's been pretty quiet from them. This is why I think, they're releasing Artemis Fowl on there, and I wouldn't be surprised to hear if Mulan heads there because they need a good selling device now.
Well, I think
for Disney Plus, but there's always kids. There's always kids, and that's a huge market for those movies.
I've got a 1-year-old, and we are watching tons of Mickey Mouse cartoons on there. Like, Disney Plus right now is just banking in terms of my viewing hours. But I would say Disney didn't prepare for this. Nobody prepared for this. Putting Onward up there, putting, Artemis Fowl's going up there. I think it's kind of like a move that they're like, this is what we sit on this and just see what happens, or at least give the consumer some content. And I think that's what I don't know what's going on in the boardrooms of Disney or NBC or ABC or I was about to say 20th Century Fox, but that's not Disney. But like Universal or all these huge media companies, they are honestly making this stuff as they go along because we've never been in this kind of situation before.
Netflix, they have a great subscriber base because they were first, and there's a lot of things that run against the idea of streaming. One example is the Oscars. It was like you had to be in theaters for a certain amount of time, and obviously there's a lot of artists, like a lot of filmmakers who are like, this is it. This is the experience. And I think you touched on a good thing, like when you mentioned event films. I think that's what Scorsese was initially saying about the Marvel movies. In his definition, they aren't cinema, but they are these event things. They are the modern day, like, smell-o-vision, like the modern day, like 3D.
They are, they are the gimmicks to drive people into the theaters. And
exactly.
Again, I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I mean, a lot of the gimmicky movies that were in the 1950s and 60s, like The Robe is a great example of the movie that was shot in Cinerama that got people in. It's a decent movie. What I agree with, and I've actually had conversations with people, I don't think Martin Scorsese is saying Marvel movies aren't cinema because they are. It's just Marvel movies aren't challenging. And we've had conversations like this where the Marvel movies don't really take risks. Like I said earlier, you go into a Marvel movie, you paid your money, you know what you're going to get, and then you walk out.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is spoilers at this point, but like anytime a character gets hurt, it doesn't matter because they get fixed. Like Civil War had a character that got paralyzed, and then next thing you know, he's walking again.
My story against like Marvel movies goes back a ways away. I stuck with them as long as I did, just because people were like, if you didn't like Iron Man 2, you'll still like Avengers. Oh, if you didn't like Avengers, you'll still like Winter Soldier. Oh, if you didn't like Winter Soldier, you're still like Black Panther. Oh, if you didn't like Black Panther, you'll still like Ragnarok. And that's kind of like where I left off. I haven't seen Ragnarok. I've seen parts of Ragnarok. Taika Waititi, like, respect him a lot. I like everything I've seen from him so far. But yeah, like what you said about risk, and when Martin Scorsese actually wrote that op-ed, like, a lot of people were on Twitter and stuff going after him when he made the initial comment, but like the op-ed like made sense, and he used that word a lot, like risk, that there is like a lack of risk. I felt like a breath of relief to myself. I was like, that's it. Like, I haven't been able to quite verbalize it, but that is what is detaching.
I actually really enjoy the Marvel movies. I actually rewatched them all a couple of months ago. Like, they're fun movies. They're good escapism. I'm a big film nerd. I'm a film history guy. I watch movies from the 1910s, 20s. Yeah. I watch them all. Marvel movies are still enjoyable. When it's done, I'm not being challenged. My point of view of the human condition is not changed. It doesn't make me question anything in terms of philosophically. The movies that stay with us through years, like The Godfather, Casablanca, these movies that really like resonate with us through generations, have a legacy component to it. They challenge us despite what generation we belong to. And my thing about the Marvel movies is that they're very good now, but I wonder, will they still be enjoyable in 30 years? Will they still have an audience with the next generation? Look at James Bond, right? I love James Bond. Dr. No and With Russia with Love, they're good films, but they're just not nearly as fun as I recall when I was a kid. But that's my personal opinion. Some people I know will disagree with me.
Yeah.
But what's interesting enough, I'm going to go back to the streaming wars, is that we're in a really interesting situation where I think what the theater is not understanding what they want in terms of what's happening. Because look, again, nobody really prepared for this, right? And with streaming being available, it's given people the opportunity to enjoy content without leaving their home. I think in order for theaters to survive in the next couple years, to get people back into theaters, I think they have to be fortunate to have event films. You know, there needs to be a film to get people into theaters. I mean, Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, it needs to demand the screen. It needs to demand the audio. Like, it just needs to demand like all these technical, because like when you look at films in the last 10 years that won Best Picture, you know, some of them are really gorgeous. You know, you get like Shape of Water and Birdman, like they're gorgeous. Then you get something like Spotlight. It's like, do you need to see Spotlight on a big screen? Not necessarily, but it's there because it's a great story.
I would even argue, do you need to see Parasite on the big screen? It's a very good film. You would still have the same experience if you saw it on your own television versus a large screen. Yeah, sure, it will look better, but the experience, I think, is about the same.
You know, if you look at TV, because of all the streaming platforms, like we even have Apple making TV shows now. Like, you have so many different... There's a lot of content out there. It's almost overwhelming. Like, too many channels, too many different things to watch, like times 10.
The second part, I think, what's happening is I think we possibly may see a collapse in the streaming content. And what I mean by this is that I don't know what the view is in terms... I don't want to be pessimistic when I say this, but we don't know what the future is going to look like with the economy. Right now, the United States is looking at the highest unemployment since the Great Depression, which is just absolutely crazy. And if you factor in the people that are not bringing any income, they're going to start shaving off things that they don't really need. Do you really need Netflix? No. Do you really need Hulu? No. Do you really need Disney Plus? No.
I wonder if it's offset by the people who are joining these streaming platforms just because they're home.
And no, that's easily could be happening. But what I think is going to happen, if the economy really doesn't start boosting up soon and people start working soon, we're going to start getting people who are going to be overwhelmed with... I mean, look, right now, I'm paying for Netflix, I'm paying for HBO, I'm paying for Hulu, I'm paying for Disney Plus. But eventually, like, how often do I use those? I mean, I use probably Disney Plus the most because of, you know, watching it with my son. And other than that, probably Netflix after that. I barely touch Hulu. I mean, I get Amazon Prime because, you know, I use Amazon like crazy. The more that's coming out, the more overwhelmed I think people are going to be. And then we're going to see a collapse where a lot of these businesses may start going out. Like, there's no way Netflix is going to go out. There's no way Disney Plus or Amazon are going to go out because those are just part of huge, huge corporations. But I'm looking at, in terms of historical context, I'm looking at the famous console collapse of the early 80s or the mid 80s, which was when all these video game companies started going out of business because there was just so much content that nobody was buying games. And that's when we saw the rise of Nintendo, obviously.
But E.T.
Yeah, there you go. But I mean, as long as these companies start turning out quality content, and I think that's the key. And as long as it's quality content, you'll get viewership, right?
TV has always had the luxury of, you know, you can advertise and get people to sit down for your show's premiere, the second, maybe even third episode, but if you aren't quality, people will start dropping off. The ad space becomes less valuable. The numbers just get less and less unless you can maintain the quality. Now with movies, that's
I think it's the same. I think that's the same with movies, especially right now. If you do not put quality films into the cinema to get people to go, you're gonna see the collapse of theaters. Look, I'm not knocking on, like, what was it, Bloodshot? the Vin Diesel movie. It looks crazy. It looks insane, but I'm not hearing it's very good. Are you willing to spend 15 something odd dollars to sit through that when right now we might be in a situation where people may not be working for quite some time? You know, that $15 comes down to, I kind of need to save that.
We were talking about Marvel and the Star Wars IP. It's like, if you have that name at the front of your movie, Star Wars or Marvel, you don't need...
It's brand recognition.
So much quality, you know.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's brand recognition, and Disney has done very well on establishing that. That's the whole point of having a franchise. That's the whole point of this. Is that,
but that's like where the quality is. It's almost like a time basis. Like, if you want someone to invest in your song, you're asking for like 3-4 minutes. If you want someone to invest in your movie, you're asking for an hour, like 2 hours, 3 hours. If you want someone to invest in your show, you're asking them to commit a lot. It's almost like a time thing. If someone I trusted, like if you came to me and you were like, you should really see XYZ that just came out, despite what the critics say, despite this, you know, I would take that into a more serious consideration. Even if I'm really convinced I won't like it, you know, it's only a few hours of my time. Where we have a lot of content now, I do think movies are going to start requiring higher quality than they have in the past, because there is a lot of competition now.
I agree.
Because there are a lot of streaming services. Like, again, Apple's making stuff.
Well, I mean, I hear from a lot of people this comment that Hollywood makes bad movies now. I don't know if it's a memory thing or people are just talking, but I mean, Hollywood has been turning out almost the same rate of quality films to bad movies probably since the beginning, since Hollywood.
They just don't make money.
Well, like, they just are forgotten, you know? If you were to look at movies that came out in the early 90s that, you know, I would start listing all these movies out, yeah, they didn't make enough money. They're pretty much forgotten because they're not good. So people don't repeat it or tell their friends and family to watch it. So they just kind of get lost. The more like horrible a film is, obviously that will get talked about because it's like, oh my god, you have to see this terrible movie. You'll have that, or Troll 2 or whatever. Some of my favorite movies are these forgotten, like, mediocre movies. I just have a great time. You know, I love, like, you know, Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Such a bananas movie.
The worst sin you can commit as a movie is just being boring. And I've told people that before, like, movies that people consider textbook bad movies. The Room is not a bad movie because it got a lot of people to talk about. You know, it's a different kind of good in that regard. The worst movies are like 3 hours, meandering plots, like putting you to sleep the whole time. When you finish them, you don't think about them.
Well,
like,
I think
much
that's,
more.
they're absolutely forgettable films. But one thing I want to point out is that I think a big thing that theaters need to do moving forward, and this is an argument I think people have been preaching about for years, is we need to start combating ticket prices, and then we need to start combating concession prices, and we need to start combating the noise pollution of people around us. People weren't going to theaters because the tickets were too expensive. They weren't going to theaters because it's messy and filthy, or they weren't going because the other theater attendees are rude. I think theaters need to actually combat those if they want to survive now. Any business, right? If they're on the verge of bankruptcy, come up with ways to survive. 2-for-1 deals, or, you know, half off Tuesdays or something like that. The problem I know with theaters is that they do have specific deals with studios when they show specific films. First run mills have to be paid a certain amount for a guarantee, and therefore they can't charge less for tickets. That's a whole, you know, crazy business side of it that I am aware of. I'm also curious because I wonder if studios, because I know Netflix did this, they recently purchased the Paris Theater in New York City, which, if anyone is aware, it's right next to the Plaza Hotel. It's a gorgeous theater. I saw Antonio Gaudi there, just an absolutely beautiful theater. And Netflix showed Marriage Story there, and they did that as a loophole to get Oscar nominations.
Yeah,
the theater.
to meet the criteria.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if studios will purchase theaters and start putting their films into theaters.
That's a whole other, like, component too that's really fascinating, is Netflix, and the fact that they are funding, like, quality films. Like, last year was like Dolomite Is My Name, The Irishman, Marriage Story. Martin Scorsese, like, was trying to get Irishman made for a while, you know, and you watch it and you're like, Oh wait, Netflix has this much money?
Well, I mean, if you do the math, if you were to think about like how much you pay for Netflix, and then if you look at the subscriber amount and you add that up per month,
It's not as surprising.
it's like insane. But also, Netflix has so much money they have to pay for distribution deals and rights deals and server space. I can't imagine. I don't even know what the profit would be, but it can't be that much. But it's still probably a lot. With studios purchasing theaters, this becomes a legal situation. In historical terms, this was something that happened in the 30s and 40s, where studios purchased theaters and they just controlled certain films to go to certain theaters, and it was a whole thing, and it was called vertical integration, and it was deemed illegal, and the studios couldn't do that anymore. I'm curious if we're going to go back to that, but not in a so like on the nose kind of method. Netflix may do it like, okay, we're only showing this one movie, but only for a couple weeks. It's a special engagement, and that's like their way around it. And I wonder if like Disney, for example, they go, okay, well, Disney, they have a movie theater on their property, so they bought it. It is now theirs, and they're going to release the newest Star Wars movie, and you can only see it there for 2 weeks before it goes on to Disney Plus, and it gives people an opportunity to see it in a theater.
We obviously are seeing a shift. One of the biggest shifts in movie history, I think you and I talked about it a little bit, was the shift between more creative control from the artists to the studio executives, which would have been a big catalyst for that was Jaws and Star Wars, and then also Heaven's Gate, which,
well, I was going to say, Heaven's Gate is what ended it all, right?
So it's now like we have to kind of vet these to make sure they are profitable. One thing that's unprecedented in entertainment right now is the amount of content and the amount of quality TV shows. We started off like 2010 with things like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad, these things that had like high budgets. Game of Thrones was almost event, could have been a big screen thing. Us growing up, going to movies with our parents, like our families, like was just such a staple, and obviously there'll always be the market for the kids that go see Frozen 2. Overall, I think they're becoming more niche.
Going to the movies is always viewed as a leisurely activity. I think this is something, especially us movie nerds, have to really understand, is that most of us live inside the movie bubble. Like, how many times we talk to somebody and they go, oh my God, you haven't seen this movie. Oh my God, you haven't seen this movie. I have a newborn. I work full time. Me going to see a movie opening weekend doesn't happen. I usually see a movie that comes out maybe a couple weeks after it comes out. I would say like most people in the country, in the United States, don't go to the movies. I think that's
a lot of people I talk to are like, why would I?
And I think a lot of people, especially fellow moviegoers and cinephiles, need to really understand that a lot of people don't go to the movies. I mean, they go to event films. That's why Avengers Endgame made $2 billion. That's why Titanic made all that money. Because, oh my God, you have to see this movie. And then finally they went. Oh my God, you have to see this movie. Avatar, and then it made all this money. And then no one ever talks about Avatar again. If you even look at the money and how much if you weigh in the average ticket price in the country, I think it's only like less than 10%.
It's expensive even for me. Every time I see a family there, I'm in my head like, I just spent $15 on this ticket just for me. I had to make sure I had the money to do that. I give a lot of credit to what MoviePass did, and even though MoviePass didn't work out, it was a disruption. I have the AMC A-List. Who knows if AMC A-List, and I think Regal has a program too, would exist if it wasn't for MoviePass coming in and disrupting.
I think another thing that could come up out of this is another subscription-based kind of program. Something in the vein of MoviePass and AMC A-List that will get people into seats. MoviePass got people to see movies that they would normally not see. That was huge. I try to see as many movies as I can in the theater, but it's really tough now having a kid, and I think other parents will know this. It's tough. But, when I was in college and really getting into movies, I was probably at the theaters almost every day. Luckily I went to a college that offered free tickets to movie theaters, but I think MoviePass gave a way for people who would only go to the movies maybe once or twice a month, to the point they were going once or twice a week. It was just really almost awe-inspiring how much that got people to go. And I wish, and I really want something like that to come back. theaters need to understand that, like, if you were to make the concessions, because look, everyone knows this, concessions are what drive.
They drive it. They drive the theater. Money. This is why I thought MoviePass would work. More people means more concessions. The ad space for the trailers and the things that run before the movie would become more valuable. I actually thought MoviePass would work out. I just think they set the price a little low to start off, and it seemed like they were mismanaged a lot. But I love that it drove innovation, because the movie theater industry is, every year I see the numbers and it's less. Conversely, like it's kind of a little different topic, but like I have friends and like they talk to me because they know I like to do the Oscar predictions and things like that. And every year it's like Oscar viewership is down. It's down. It's like the average people don't know what the movies are. They'll watch because they like the celebrities and things like that. And the celebrities can obviously drive ratings for awards, which is why we have like 20 of them. But an average person, if you were to show them like the best picture nominees, they may be able to pick out like a couple of them. And I think that's why they extended around 08, 09 to like more nominees. They thought that would kind of be an answer. But the fact is, like, independent films are the quality films, and they don't get as many eyeballs because they're not heavily advertised or anything like that.
A lot of independent theaters don't really get into wide releases, right? Slumdog Millionaire won the Best Picture Oscar 2008. I remember seeing it in a limited theater in New York City, which doesn't exist anymore. Probably it was called Lincoln Plaza Cinemas. Probably one of my favorite cinemas in all of New York City. Sadly, it's gone. And I remember seeing Slumdog Millionaires in the theater. I remember saying to myself that this movie could win Best Picture. Like, I remember saying that to myself. The movie got more wide release, and then, that's also how movies were used to be released back in, before Jaws. I made a whole video about how Jaws changed the way movies were released. And it was also done as an accident because people originally thought Jaws was not going to be a hit. And a lot of times studios would release films simultaneously was a way to make as much money as possible, because back in the day it was, hey, this movie is not very good, don't go see it. I'm sorry, when studios would release the movie as a way to make as much money as possible, so they did that with Jaws, but they didn't realize actually Jaws was good, so...
That's a big factor too, and like what we've kind of been talking about is what is the value of word of mouth, and compared to a ticket price, not just ticket prices aside, like to the average non-movie viewer, I use like Fandango now, I use Amazon to rent movies, I have like little movie libraries on a bunch of different platforms, it could be like $5 here or there, but sometimes I aim for ones that are available on one of the streaming platforms because of that. But your average person, unless they're like really dying to see it, they're not going to seek out streaming a movie. Like, it just seems rare, especially with all the shows.
A lot of times, like, let's look for a movie on Netflix. Oh, I was really wanting to watch this movie. It's not on Netflix. I'm not going to watch. We'll find something else.
As a movie person, that happens to me a lot. I recently bought some 4K monitors, and I was like, I want to see just some eye candy. Like, I just want to see beautiful movies. Some first thing that came to mind was Blade Runner 2049. Had to pay for it, rent it on Amazon. I wanted to go through the Wes Anderson library as well, and I think maybe 2 of them were available on streaming platforms, but the rest of them were, I had to pay like $2 to $5 to rent. Because it's on 4K monitor, I had to rent it in HD,
I think the tough situation I think we're in, if you want to get people into theaters, we need quality movies, but no one can predict what will be quality and what will not be quality. When you're making art, right, you don't know what people's reactions are going to be, right? And this is with movies, right? Sometimes people go in with the best intentions and they make the worst movie. Some people going, we'll see what happens, and it comes out to be insane, right?
And that's where you made the point about Jaws. Like, no one saw that coming with Jaws, that it would be this very profitable and like literally reshape the... It was funny because it was like 5 or so years ago, there was an article where Spielberg and George Lucas were talking about how difficult it is for them to get things funded. And it's like, we have the name recognition, but it's still really difficult for us to get things funded. And it's like, when I read that, I kept thinking like, well, that's you all. you all did that.
You did this yourself. You shot yourself
indirectly, but
I mean, no, yeah, Jaws was designed to be a monster movie, a B movie. Like, no one expected it to be done so perfectly. And it was really the accident, obviously, the shark not working and, all these things that were Jaws ended up working so much better than what it did. As much as I love Jaws, I show it to people who have never seen Jaws, and they tell me how bored they are with it. And it's just like, it's all subjective, right? We don't know, like, what I think is a great film, someone else may think is not a great film.
These are investments. I feel like The Irishman shouldn't have happened. Netflix, as successful and big of a company they are, and enterprise they are, on the outside looking in, which they keep a lot of their numbers pretty hidden, it just doesn't seem like they're making great business decisions. Like, was Irishman a great business decision?
Well, I mean, how many people watched that over Thanksgiving break? I mean, how many people are probably watching it right now for the first time?
But even with that, I know that was like such an expensive movie. And like, obviously it's Scorsese. Scorsese brings a dollar amount anytime his name's on a movie. You know, I saw...
Which isn't a lot. If you look at Scorsese's history, he does not make a lot of money with his films.
No, it's not that much. And I was so lucky. I saw Irishman at the Enzian Theater here in Orlando, which for people listening, that's like pretty much the only like real independent theater here in Orlando. And I've lived here 10 years in Orlando. I saw at the Enzian before all the award buzz. I saw 12 Years a Slave. I saw Birdman. I saw Boyhood. That's another component too. Parasite can now be considered a profitable movie because of its award buzz. I saw it at Fantastic Fest a few months before it had released anywhere. And I remember, like, I had just spent that week seeing like 25 different movies. I was pretty burned out. This is like one of the last movies I saw. And like halfway into it, I thought I kind of got it. I was kind of like, okay, I see what's going on. And then it just started getting so creative. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is easily my favorite of the 25 I just saw at the festival. And this is going to be big. There were so many people when the Oscar predicting came around saying like, but a foreign film has never won Best Picture. But a foreign film was never, I was like, this is time. It's time. Diversity and inclusion is very profitable in Hollywood right now too. And it's a great thing that they're propping up these films and things like that. So the fact that it was a foreign film, I did not see it hurting it that much. Like obviously there's going to be people in the Academy who are like, I don't want to read subtitles. That's that. But that carries a weight. And I think that's why you see a lot of for your consideration campaigns and why studios put certain money into movies like that wouldn't normally be super profitable, like King's Speech. The Artist is a great example of that. You know, it went on to win Best Picture.
I was generally surprised that it won Best Picture. I think my money was on 1917.
But there's definitely a profitability that comes with awards. Where we're talking about movie viewing becoming a niche thing. That's like a niche way to make something that may not have had the biggest budget make a lot of money. But it's not a ton of money. It's not going to be Marvel money. It's not. There's so many different.
Well, especially
tiers.
low-budget horror films, Blair Witch, Paranormal Activity. These were movies that were, you know, they made massive amounts of money for the budget.
As much as a cash cow that Hollywood is, I'm surprised they're not still making Paranormal Activity movies because that seemed like a low risk. Because
eventually, after a while, they get.
Thing they could have milked to death.
Yeah, but I mean, after a while, if they're not bringing a certain percentage of the box office gross.
Well, and the budgets kept going up too, and then it's. I think one of the interesting thing about this whole virus and the whole social distancing has been watching a lot of programs, like for example, like Saturday Night Live, you know, the Parks and Rec reunion, like have to get really innovative and creative with not having people together.
Well, I actually saw an article where a production studio in Los Angeles created a CGI actor. And then we saw something a couple years ago where it was an AI was editing a film. So I mean,
automation's taking over the acting.
But I think, you know, look, I do believe we're going to get back to some normalcy. It won't happen overnight. It'll happen in some time. Movie theaters are going to go back to normal. Spanish flu ended and we got back to a normal, you know.
For people like listening, we're here in Florida. Most of y'all know things have been a little more relaxed here than most of the other parts of the country. I was walking around and like the amount of people I already saw, it's like I definitely see a scenario where movie theaters will start to come back soon, but every other seat will kind of have it, and then like in between they wipe things down. But even then, at first, people are not going to rush back.
But how do you guarantee that? Like, someone's going to go into the theater and go, well, I don't want to sit here. I'm going to sit right next to this person. My wife told me a ridiculous story when I think she had a job interview. We were in college, and she had some time to kill. And she went to go see Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life by herself. and she went to the theater, sat down, and this random guy just sat right next to her.
It's almost like you're at a urinal.
Oh, and people do,
there's a bunch of urinals, and the guy comes up right next.
I go to movies by myself all the time.
Same.
And people,
I like it.
Yeah, I do too. Especially if I go see like an indie film or a low budget film that's not really, that kind of goes against the grain, and I bring somebody and I'm kind of worried what their thoughts are. But I've always noticed, like, why is this? There's like 20 seats available. Why are you sitting right next to me?
Well, I don't know if you've experienced this a lot, but I have. I definitely have lately. But I've become really ADHD when I watch things at home. Like, I want to be on my phone. I'll like pause a lot. I was so glad I saw Irishman in the theater. Towards the end, I really had to use the bathroom. I hate using the bathroom during movies. But what I love about the theater experience, and this is why I don't see it dying anytime soon, is I love that I go in there, movie starts, my phone is off. Going to Fantastic Fest kind of like ramped this up for me. I realized like how much I like just being shown something. Like when the movie starts boring me and my attention drifts, I start paying attention to the production design or like the craft of it all and everything like that. But it's become really difficult for me to focus on movies at home.
I'll speak for myself. If the movie is engaging, I will be engaged. If the movie is not engaging me, then I will check my phone. I'll be distracted. I recently rewatched Zulu from 1964. I'm doing one of my videos on it, and I was completely engaged. And I noticed that, and I was like, wow, I looked at my phone maybe once.
I feel like there's something to be said about the average attention span of a person today, in the sense that, like, people read a lot of books and then movies came out. People watched a lot of movies and then TV started becoming a thing. There's so many times I've opted to watch a 20-minute fleeting comedy. Like a lot of people are watching The Office right now, ramped up and because you can put it on, you can be on your phone. And now, like what we're seeing with Quibi, you're seeing it with TikTok. I've talked to so many average people who are like, I don't watch any movies anymore at all. I don't even think about watching movies. I have a hard enough time watching TV shows. I mostly spend a lot of my time on YouTube.
Here's the counterpoint to that. The most successful films in film history, right? You got Gone with the Wind, The Godfather, Avengers Endgame, Avatar,
Long as fuck.
Titanic. They're all long as fuck. Exactly. I don't think people are more ADD or they can't concentrate more. I think it comes down to quality. I think if you make a quality film, people are going to be engaged and they're going to watch and they're going to care. Look at Game of Thrones. If you look, that's an hour episode each for 8 seasons. There are people who are combing through single lines of dialogue.
When Game of Thrones completed, which obviously everyone knows, very controversial ending, I think it was IndieWire or someone like wrote an article about how this would be the last show that we all watch together as like a global community. Like this is the last show that everyone's talking about the water cooler. Even people not into fantasy are talking about. Then this COVID thing happens, and now everyone starts talking about Tiger King.
Yeah,
and Tiger King came out.
There's always going to be that,
Yeah,
Netflix has an option to release an episode every week. It's something that HBO does. I think The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan is being adapted into a show, which I would argue is probably the single greatest fantasy series ever made. It's up there with Lord of the Rings. If they do that show right, and they do that show in the same vein of get people hooked like Game of Thrones, that will eclipse it by far. Every couple years we have a show where everyone's hooked, right? You had Game of Thrones, you had Breaking Bad, you had Lost, you had The Sopranos. And that's going to happen because no matter what, there's always going to be somebody needs that moment.
Well, I think the IndieWire article was more about the saturation of content.
No, I disagree with that 100% because at
there's
the end of the
a
day, there's a lot of stuff, but when the one comes out where everyone can talk about and it's not going to happen overnight where like, okay, Game of Thrones ended, so next week it's this. No, it's going to take a couple months.
This is all circling back around to the value of the word of mouth. Before I knew anything about it, because people don't want to spoil it for me or whatever, I'm hearing people say stuff about limbs being eaten off, like I'm hearing torn off. I'm hearing things about like murder mysteries, about the polygamy, and like things. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of different.
I had no intention of watching Tiger King or heard of Tiger King until somebody texted me and was like, hey, you need to watch this. And then once I watched it, I started texting people, and that's how this works. It was quality content. I watch Netflix Hollywood. I'm not going to text somebody that. I didn't think it was that good. In fact, nobody's even texting me about watching it. And I think this is the thing throughout history of film and cinema and television. For every single hit, right, that we talk about and people go crazy for, there's, 15 or so failures. Like you said, it's an investment and it's a risk, and we don't know what works and what doesn't. I don't think the filmmakers behind Tiger King knew that it was going to be this crazy thing.
Every movie is a little bit of a gamble. Studios found ways around that. Like with Marvel, they follow a formula. They don't take too many risks. And
which is why I argue why Last Jedi is so good, because it's the biggest risk of any Star Wars film that I could remember.
yeah, with Last Jedi, the risk didn't work. But after watching Rise of Skywalker, I've grown to admire Last Jedi a little more, because I'm like, here's a movie that did the opposite of taking any risks.
Absolutely. I am so 100% for a film that takes a risk. Even if it doesn't work, I appreciate when an artist or a director does something that's not been done before and try something.
One thing in the market that is interesting has been video games. So video games, just like movies, were a big financial risk for the longest time, until they introduced a little thing in like the late 2000s called DLC and like add-ons and things like that. I haven't read all the numbers. It can almost be as easy as you make it so like it costs money to change your avatar's clothes or style your avatar a little bit, you're immediately making your money back. What Fortnite did, coming out for free, being kid friendly so all the kids can play it as well, it's blown up into this huge phenomenon. The whole video game industry, the demand for quality took a huge dip with video games. They found ways to mess with the reward receptors of the brain, like with multiplayer games like Call of Duty, like Halo, things like that. And movies, not all movies can be Clue.
Plugging my YouTube channel. One of the episodes I'm working on is on the Corbett Fitzgerald's fight, which was the first feature film ever made. And this was a huge risk because, one, before this, films were usually a couple minutes long. I think the longest was like 20-something minutes, maybe like less than a half hour. And it was a boxing match. And people took a risk. I was like, hey, let's film the actual boxing match. Because before this, boxing matches were filmed only using about a minute of film stock because the camera couldn't take more. So the filmmaker behind Corbett Fitzsimmons' fight was able to put a thing called the Latham loop into the camera and able to keep the film going. And when the film was released, it made, off the top of my head, I don't remember, but it was, I think, over $700,000. And this is like an 1890 something.
Wow.
Something insane. I think the budget was like probably $3,000 or something. At the time, investors went, oh my God, we can make money off of this. The Corbett Fitzsimmons fight is a pinnacle moment in film history because of that. You can make a business out of it. And now we're seeing it with the streaming, right? Because when Netflix came out and was streaming, how do you make money from this? Just subscription and Movie Pass not really working from it. People are going to find the minutiae to make things work.
Such a complicated and weird subject is that demand for quality and how it has evolved and reshaped through the years. And I think with this whole virus, there's probably not many movies being made right now that we're gonna see less.
Yeah, everything's paused.
The average people who say like there's no good movies anymore, and it's the same with music. What's popular in the world of music is always going to be what's different than what was popular previously.
Like for me, example, I'm a huge metalhead, right?
There's niches, yeah. If you love the Beatles and you only want to hear music like the Beatles, that is still being made today. It's just not popular. There will always be good movies being made. There will always be good TV. But now we're asking, because there is a lot more content, period, we're asking audiences to do a little bit of work on their end.
Because there's so much content, it's like, okay, you have 10 options, right? But you want the audience to watch your option. So you need to make it a way where it's like, okay, we need to make sure people are watching.
But when you saturate a market like the way Marvel did, there becomes a limit. There becomes a limit where you inhibit competition a little bit. Like, every studio obviously has their big franchise. Universal's like branch of independent film is able to fund more independent films. If they come out with a Fast and Furious every year, then by all means come out with a Fast and Furious every year. People enjoy it. People escape with it.
To mention Universal with AMC banning them, I don't know how this is going to go. I think right now we're seeing kind of like a pissing contest, really. I think the theaters are scared shitless because Universal made a crap ton of money on the new Trolls film. And I think a lot of the other studios are now going, this is very interesting. This is a pivotal moment in film history where I think we're going to see things change.
The theaters lose control.
Yes, and the only way the theaters are going to gain control is to have the power to incentivize an audience, right? I don't want to say the word gimmick and go back to what they did back in the 1950s to bring people back into the theaters, but they need to do something that say, you can watch that movie at home or you can watch it in the theater. And if you watch it in the theater, you're going to have this kind of experience.
Movies, just in general, may be bridging into a more of a niche thing, more for things like people like you and I. The only other difference with that, obviously, is kids and like kids'
It's a
films.
leisurely thing you do.
Yeah,
right.
But it's definitely becoming more niche. We're in the age of content, and like where you mentioned earlier, there's always those things where people are like, "Oh, you haven't seen XYZ." Well, time is only going forward. There's only going to be more great stuff, more great content.
And if you miss something in the theaters, you can always catch it at home, you know? I didn't get to see Portrait of a Lady on Fire in theaters. Shucks, but I watched it when it was available to stream. Sometimes, you know, we just have to sit at home and watch something.
It's been great having you on here, Jordan. You're one of my closest friends. I love talking movies with you. You want to plug your stuff real quick?
Yeah, if anyone wants to check my stuff out, I have a YouTube channel called Film Histories. I just make mini docs on various topics in film history that sometimes don't really get a lot of attention, from famous productions to actors that have gone missing or murdered to and I even plug some of my favorite films that don't get much recognition. So yeah, if you guys want to check it out, it'll be great. Now I'm also on Instagram, Film Histories. Yeah, all right, cool.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you.